think it's fair to say Watch Dogs has been one of the most aggressively marketed games this year, and as a result, the so-called hype train has a lot of passengers. It's been the focus of much criticism pre and post release, and while Ubisoft's business practices are pretty questionable, I decided to take a look at what content the game has to offer. I'd like to stress that this is very much my first impressions of the title, after about 10 hours played. At its core, Watch Dogs is a third-person cover shooter set in a fictionalized, open-world version of Chicago. The twist being that the city's security is largely managed by an autonomous system known as CTOS, and that's how Watch Dogs differentiates itself. As the protagonist, you play Aiden Pierce, a vigilante hacker who bends this system to fit his own needs, be it good or bad. So, the game focuses on three things: hacking, shooting, and open world exploration. Let's start with hacking. From his phone, Aiden can control many of the city's electronics, from traffic lights to bridges. Advertising would have you believe that the level of control hacking grants is really very extensive, when in fact it's actually quite understated. 5 hours into Watch Dogs, I had access to all the hacking options, once enough arbitrary points had been spent in the right section of the skill tree, of course. Road blockers, traffic lights, steam pipes and bridges are pretty much the only useful systems to hack as you're moving quickly about the city. It does of course open up a little as you take to foot. A greater variety of hacks, such as disrupting enemy communications and overloading transformers, begins to play a useful role. It's a lot of fun to set a guard's grenade to detonate and then watch the panic that ensues, but it all feels a little superfluous. You're equipped with more than enough firepower to take on any mission using stealth or brute force. Hacking feels more like an option than a necessity, and I found myself using it not due to its effectiveness, but just because it's plain fun. And that's great, don't get me wrong. They've managed to make the hacking mechanic feel enjoyable to use, but they could have done so much more with it. Rather than making it feel like a secondary mechanic, it should have been the focus. The problem is, such a traditional third-person cover shooter system was used, that there is really no need to bother with hacking. Disregarding points where the game forces it upon you, of course. There are both positives and negatives. For one, the abilities are fun to use, blended with the game's environment well, and make the overall experience that much more enjoyable. On the other hand, it could have been more flexible. A greater diversity of options may have helped the hacking feel more free flow and not as limited. Besides its very obvious applications in the Watch Dogs story, hacking serves another purpose. Destruction, explosions and vandalism aside, every NPC, every character you see on the street can be profiled. The action of profiling is more intended to allow peers to track down crime or unlock additional cars. Profiling is as simple as getting your phone out and targeting someone. It then provides a couple of pieces of personal information about them. I found this really very intriguing. It humanised every single one of the pedestrians in the city. They were no longer there to populate the environment. Instead, they each have their own story. And while this has no real effect on the game, it went a long way in convincing me that this world was real. And the game needed that because everything else feels disconnected. For a city with such an emphasis on communication and interconnectivity, news travels slowly. There is a morale system in place. It's the epitome of contrived game systems. Aiden murders 2 civilians, that's deserving of a slap on the wrist and some negative standing. Aiden murders 2 criminals, whose actions are largely unknown. Well then, you must be a good guy and rewarded for your vigilante justice. The state of the city and its law enforcement should be a reflection of your actions, rather than just a small bar which serves to remind you you're either Batman or the Punisher. Morality systems can be done well. I just feel they are far too black and white right now. Morality can be very grey, and I'd like to see games reflect that. Moving on to the combat mechanics, I found it all very par for the course. Use the environment and sticky cover system to provide a tactical advantage, while trying to use one of the 4 guns you're allowed to carry to try and take down the opposition. Hacking can be used to alter various objects, creating a somewhat more dynamic environment. I don't have many complaints about it per se. It's a solid system that's very enjoyable. There is of course room for improvement. For example, the guns are a mixed bag. Some feel really great to use. The M1014 shotgun has good sound assets and plenty of recoil. There is a real weight behind every shot. The gunplay of the SR-25 sniper, however, feels pathetic in comparison. None of the guns are by any means bad, but they are all made pretty redundant by the Spec Ops 1911 silenced pistol. This gun is 100% silent and takedowns every target I've come across in a single headshot, with the exception to armoured troops. If you take the stealth approach, no gun, at least for the first 10 hours of the game, can match it. Hacking is pointless when you can single-handedly take out 30 guys with a pistol and have their friends in the next room be none the wiser. And it's a problem that runs throughout the whole game. After around 5 hours, I was bored with the stealth and decided to take the guns blazing approach. It did make everything far more challenging. The game's AI provides a suitable level of challenge. Fire one shot and the entire area will be aware of you. The AI works together to flank your position. Taking refuge in a corner won't help. Stick in any one position for too long and they'll use grenades to flush you out. It makes combat interesting. Give the enemy too much time to position and life can get very hard. That said, when presented with a smaller number of enemies, dealing with them is a very straightforward process. This is kind of where the hacking comes into its own. Combine it with the really solid gunplay and things begin to make sense. Hacking a guard's phone to stop reinforcements and detonating his grenade when he is around a bunch of his pals, all while doing the typical cover shooter stuff, is just plain fun. It's not smart nor deep gameplay, but it's very enjoyable, and in the end, that's the whole point of video games. So, on to the open world portion. The city of Chicago is interesting to explore. There is an abundance of side missions to experience and crimes to resolve with your own ideas of vigilante justice. And if you can't inflict enough justice on the world as is, there are plenty of gun shops to locate and fast cars to steal scattered amongst the city. As before mentioned, there is a real disconnect when it comes to the game's theme and the story it's attempting to portray. For example, it's possible to go on a murderous rampage, indiscriminately killing all in your way. Once out of ammo, escaping by train, by boat, or just with a fast car is pretty easy, and with enough of a wait, the police will have lost interest in you altogether. Set that aside, however, and what you've got left is again very enjoyable. There is enough of a selection of vehicles to keep driving interesting. Whilst there is a quick travel system in place, it's far more fun to move from mission to mission, stopping to explore whatever pops up along the way. Triggering a bridge at high speed to create a makeshift ramp, or raising street blockades to restrict access, makes the environment feel more flexible. You alter it to suit your own needs. There's not a whole lot that can be changed, but what's available is done well. Being the big AAA title that Watch Dogs is, I'd say it's fair to expect a strong story component, held together by the previously discussed mechanics. I've already established that there is a narrative disconnect between the player's actions and the general goings-on in the world, which may somewhat distance you from the game, and the lack of immersion can hurt the overall experience. Watch Dogs' story doesn't really make up for this. In an interesting contradiction, a better job is done with humanising the city's population through a few small pieces of information than has been done with Aiden and his family. The story was in fact so hard to follow due to a lack of interesting characters. Each mission became more about the task, rather than the consequences it may have on the story. Fortunately, the missions are varied enough to hold your attention for a while, but many of the side missions are far too similar to those of the story to be worthwhile. These tasks involve objectives such as tailing individuals, using cameras for observation, assaulting locations, amongst various other things. All in all, they're pretty generic and offer little to break away from the traditional missions that we're all so used to. A game can be carried by its mechanics and theme, and that appears to be the case here. The storyline is just far too forgettable. For all its chaos and stupidity, it still tries to take itself seriously. If the game had lightened up a little, the whole experience may have been greatly improved upon. There are elements of Watch Dogs which are just dumb fun, plain and simple. Motorway billboards are a great example of this. They can be hacked to display comedic messages. There's no reason to do it, it's just amusing, and more of the game should have adopted that kind of philosophy. Despite its shortcomings, I've had a really good time with Watch Dogs. It requires some suspension of disbelief in regards to its story and how the world reacts to the protagonist's actions. But put that aside, and what you're left with is a really entertaining open world experience that has no lack of things to do, places to go, and criminals to shoot. It all ties together well with solid mechanics. none of which are particularly innovative, but they remain really fun and satisfying. I didn't find myself bored with the gunplay, nor the driving. I just wish the story better supported the mechanics. If that had been the case, we may have had a game worthy of all the hype. Instead, what we are left with is a game that has a ton of content that's mostly very enjoyable. I still feel like Watch Dogs is a bit of a missed opportunity, and I hope they follow up on this new IP. Thanks for watching, and I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments below. If you're interested in seeing more content such as this, please consider subscribing. Thanks again.